In today's interview with Derek Yoo, the founder and CEO of Moonbeam and Moonriver, we will find out how these projects work, what are its unique traits, so why might many people consider in the future moving towards these blockchains for everyday use, and of course we're going to talk about the usability and scalability of Polkadot, why it might be one of the top most usable blockchains in the next coming years, and of course Derek Yoo is going to tell his vision of how he sees the cryptocurrency space in the upcoming 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. What blockchains will be used, what characteristics and what functionality should they provide in order for the people to join and use them. So let's jump right into the interview and see what Derek Yoo has to say about it. Yes, Derek, first of all, thank you very, very much for being able to be here, for taking your time, because we have a big community of Moonbeam, Moonriver, basically fans, because we're talking about it already almost a year on our YouTube channel here. And I think this interview should be really full of info, should be really interesting and positive. And yeah, so thank you, first of all, for taking your time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's always, I know we have like a lot of community members, from your part of the world. So it's always been something that has been important to us to,
thank you,
to engage.
Maybe for the people who are new to the channel or Moonbeam and Moonriver, could you please, in a few sentences, explain and tell us what Moonbeam is as a project and what are its unique traits, basically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say that the simple way to describe Moonbeam is that it's a smart contract platform, blockchain. But what's unique about it is that it's been specifically built to support interoperability and kind of cross-chain use cases. And yeah, we can get. I'm sure we'll get into more of how that works, later in the talk. But that's driven, a lot of the design decisions and other kinds of decisions we've had to make when creating the product. Is what is it that's the most kind of interoperable and compatible decisions we could make in creating Moonbeam.
And what are the biggest benefits of using Moonbeam from the point of view of a normal crypto user's perspective? So why choose Moonbeam over any other different blockchain?
Yeah, there's a few different answers to that question. I mean, I'll start with the simpler answer. So a simple answer is that Moonbeam is interesting. It just launched. So, the network just launched in January. So it's always interesting when you're at the beginning of the development of an entire ecosystem. And so that's the phase we're in right now, where, we've been spending the last few months deploying different kinds of infrastructure and other kind of necessary elements. But you already see this whole ecosystem of different dApps, different protocols being deployed to the network. And I think that that's of interest just to be early on, like when a new ecosystem is forming. There's a lot of opportunities for both users and for developers, like in that case. But I think in the longer run, really our idea is that there's going to be a big change in the way apps are created. Right now, today, apps are created largely, I think, using this single chain mindset. That's what's driven a lot of DApp development, since Ethereum came out. Is, hey, I have one blockchain, I'm going to create like a set of smart contracts, I'll deploy them to the one blockchain. And we're at the beginning of a big change, is our idea, that people, now that it's clear that there's going to be many blockchains out there permanently, it's not, things, I think almost no one argues these days that it's going to collapse back down to just one or two or three. Then I think people are thinking through now, okay, well, what does this mean even to have an app that can, be multi-chain, right? That can address like users and assets that are. And so I think we're at the beginning of this big shift in the way apps are created to, create them in this like natively multi-chain way. And that's really that's the whole point of Moonbeam, is to be a great place for developers to build those kinds of apps. And I think that in the long run is going to be what's interesting about Moonbeam, is that it's home, and we see it starting now, even with development teams that are forming. We're going to be home to this like new kind of blockchain-based application that's natively designed in a multi-chain way.
And talking about multi-chain, is it more you're talking about Polkadot and it's basically multi-parachain ecosystem, as you say it, or do you also consider even other blockchains like Ethereum and so on?
Yeah, no, so absolutely. So I think that This whole idea of being the best place to create a multi-chain app was the idea that led to a lot of decisions, as I mentioned before. So one of those decisions was to even build on top of Polkadot in the first place. We did that because that was a good fit for this vision, right? So Polkadot has, well, not only it provided tools for us to build our own blockchain, so that's Substrate, and that was extremely helpful. I think for anyone that wants to build a blockchain these days, using one of these frameworks, either Substrate or Cosmos SDK, there's really kind of two choices these days, is by far the most logical thing to do, because it saves you a lot of time to use one of those frameworks. So that was one reason. But really, Polkadot provides, has this kind of interoperability built into the system. So that means that by building on Polkadot, we got like a big leg up, being able to interact with any of the parachains that are in the Polkadot ecosystem, and they have this XCM technology, which is a very highly secure way that those interactions can happen. So that's definitely part of our story. Is because we're part of Polkadot, we have this like very rich kind of solid foundation and kind of interoperability that's built in. But I would say that there's a big world out there, right? There's a lot of different blockchains out there. So it would be limiting if our story was only like focused on just the Polkadot ecosystem. And when we talk to developers, if they're looking to create, let's say, a DeFi protocol that is addressing, assets that are like, valuable assets across like crypto at large, then you need to have like a capability that spans to like other blockchains. So like Ethereum mainnet, like Avalanche. I mean, there's a number of other places that have a lot of activity these days. So for that, we are working quite closely with a number of different, there's a lot of change happening very quickly in this area, but these new like interoperability networks that are designed for developers and designed to be able to pass like general messages, between instances of the app that are deployed to different blockchains. So that's, folks like Axelar, work with another team called Nomad. There's a project Layer Zero we just did an event with. So there's a number of other interop protocols, and I think that's actually those are going to be driving a lot of developer activity in the next, let's call it like the next couple of years.
Yeah, and you also mentioned the XCM technology and Polkadot itself. I would really definitely love to come back to this one. But first of all, some other questions regarding Moonbeam and Moonriver. So Moonbeam and Moonriver, they have about, actually more than 100 different dApps in their ecosystem right now. But compared to other chains, you said it's a new chain. That's totally normal. That it's a different number, a little smaller one. When do you expect the core of Moonbeam's maybe DeFi ecosystem to form? And what dApps do you expect to be the most important ones there, or the most basically adoption driving dApps?
Yeah. So I'd say, we actually just had someone launch this site called Downtown Moonbeam, where they look to like inventory and collect like all of the different dApps. I think the number is actually, was upwards towards 200. So many of them we don't even know, right? Because they just deploy and they're not like they're talking to us. They just go ahead and do it. So that's been an incredible thing to just see, this deployment activity. But as you say, I mean, we're 3 months in, so it is still early, but growing. We're seeing the numbers of these deployments growing. In terms of the use cases that are being deployed, I would still say it's primarily DeFi. So over half of the projects deployed are DeFi, probably close to 70% are in the DeFi area. I would say the other main area where we see traction is kind of in this NFT GameFi area. There's a number of teams pursuing different kinds of projects there. One pattern that's pretty common is that you have a set of NFTs that are being sold that will then later have utility in the game, that's being created. We are seeing quite a bit of activity on that end. But I do expect that DeFi will still be a primary use case on Moonbeam, and that's where we're seeing, not only the most activity. That's where we expect, that's what the use cases we expect to drive, usage and user adoption, like for the network. We're kind of just ending this like infrastructure bootstrapping phase right now. The one element that is, we have a number of infrastructures already been deployed. So things like, a lot of the teams came to us and said, we need an implementation of the Gnosis multisig. We need Etherscan as a block explorer. So there's a bunch of tools. The one that is about to deploy is Chainlink. So Chainlink integration is something that, it's actually, they did an integration on Moonriver, but for Moonbeam, that's something that we expect in the next few weeks. And that's a big unlock. So there's a lot of things that have been waiting on this Chainlink deployment that will unlock lending and borrowing. And lending and borrowing is the I'd call it kind of the heart of like a DeFi ecosystem, right? It's like hard to kind of do much like until you have that. I mean, if you just have DEXs, there's only so much that can happen. Once you have like a lending and borrowing system along with DEXs, along with, you know, there's yield aggregators, all these other protocols, you know, then I think you have like enough interaction points where things start to get interesting. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think we're just like at the start of that, right? Of getting kind of these basic pieces in place. And, you know, I expect over the summer, you know, for there to be, you know, much more kind of DeFi activity leading the way on Moonbeam. That's my expectation.
So DeFi is the primary like point right now, which is most important to you as the Moonbeam team, Moonriver team. But is Moonbeam, for example, also totally compatible for launching games there, for example, or maybe you have User, the social network NFT marketplace there. So these types of projects will also work totally fine there and can be usable later on.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that I would definitely call that, as I mentioned, the second area. And there, it's been a lot of, I mean, there are some you know, VC funded kind of larger teams, but there's a lot of grassroots teams. This is, I think, one of the things that maybe is part of the feel of Moonbeam in our ecosystem is that there is a pretty heavy kind of grassroots feeling to it, where, you know, a lot of the teams are you know, either self-funded smaller teams, but they just really like, you know, care about, you know, creating their project. And I think that's actually good. I mean, that is, you know, you get this different feel depending on what chain you're on, right? Some chains have much more of this, you know, a little bit of top down, like, you know, big funding coming from like VCs, and it's a more of a money-oriented, you know, feel to the thing. And, you know, you need some of that too, I think, to progress things. But, you know, I think we're kind of proud of the fact that we have this grassroots community. We have quite a strong community, and, you know, that's helpful and attractive to projects when they're deploying too, right? Because when projects deploy, they kind of know, hey, there's like this built-in community around the chain that then will be interested in any kind of, you know, interesting project that comes and will become part of their community. And so I think that's an advantage, you know, that we have. That's not just, you know, about money and other things like this.
I think Moonbeam does have the biggest community on all of Polkadot, because I can only see it from the Discord point of view. I think that's just thankfully to the pre-work that was done before, like even a year before it was launching, with the ambassadorship and stuff. But going, for example, to Polkadot, the whole ecosystem itself, how do you see the ecosystem of Polkadot? Why might it be better than some other different blockchains? So what is the how to say it better, the technical advancements that Polkadot offers its basically blockchain parachain builders that other blockchains can't offer?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think this is something that the market doesn't really understand that well. I mean, from my perspective, the infrastructure like layer that's being created by the core parity team on Polkadot is like best in class, like right now, in terms of you know, first of all, when you talk about sharded models, right? So you know, obviously Polkadot is a sharded model, and by the way, you know, this was hotly debated, right? If you rewind back, you know, a year in the past, like, you know, people were debating, well, is sharded correct or not? Like, can you have a super fast single chain instead? You know, with the notable exception of Solana, perhaps sticking to that, like to their guns on that, I think almost everyone else is like moving towards a sharded model. Even like, you know, so like BSC is launching like, you know, their kind of sub shards, let's call them. You know, Near obviously is a sharded model. You know, Polygon is like, you know, has their new like, you know, super nets, I think they're calling them. So and Avalanche, you know, has their subnets. So everyone, I think, is kind of realized that no matter how fast you make a single chain, you're going to run out of capacity at some point, so that you need to move to a sharded model. So I think that's kind of a correct bet that Polkadot made. But really, I think not all these sharded models are created equal. So, and it's like hard. This is like hard engineering work. It takes like, you know, many years to build these like tools and infrastructure in a way that makes sense. So I think that the advantage that Polkadot has is going to become more apparent over time. Like, as you know, because I think for some of these other chains, it's a little bit of a, you know, they're trying to engineer the shards on a little bit after the fact versus having this kind of idea from the start. And so this is where, you know, I think that's the strength of Polkadot, is that in the underlying architecture, the ability to customize the shards, like, you know, highly customize them versus every shard being an EVM, for example, is like what some other people are taking. And, you know, allowing for this like native interoperability. I think if you look at almost everyone else's like sharding implementation, they're like, they're not like they're making sacrifices on one of those points. And so, but it takes, as with most things, the parachains on Polkadot just launched. We were the first one to launch 3 months ago, and so I see all of Polkadot in this like bootstrapping phase right now, where chains need to get deployed. They need to kind of get their feet under them. A lot of teams are. These are teams that are launching a blockchain for the first time, which even despite these tools is not the easiest thing to do in the world. So, and then there's a part of the architecture of Polkadot that I believe in is this more kind of structured hierarchical model. So the big comparison that's often made is to Cosmos. So Cosmos has a lot of the same approach in the sense of you have this toolkit, you can build whatever chain you want, but it definitely is a looser structure, right? Where you have independent chains that then can kind of optionally communicate with each other. The Polkadot idea is much more structured, right? So you have this relay chain, everything is hanging off the relay chain, and even as teams, like when there's upgrades, everyone has to upgrade at the same time. So that can be both a challenge, but what that means is that there's kind of a uniformity that you can expect, and being able to interact with other chains becomes like easier then. And so I'm a believer in this little bit more structured approach. I think that's going to make cross-chain scenarios easier to implement.
So what you're saying is basically maybe we will see the potential of Polkadot more clearly on practice, not just in theory, in some future. First of all, because of great sharding possibility, and second of all, for more basic, like, I don't know if it's the right word, freedom for the developers, so they can create the parachain as they want, but it still has some kind of the same standards in order to communicate with other parachains.
I think that those are definitely two of the key points.
Maybe why do the developers might want so much freedom? Because I'm not a developer at all. Why might basically creating an own blockchain from scratch be better than just using a standard model like on some different blockchain?
Yeah. So, well, I would say this: that when you're a developer looking to create a new protocol, a new app, there is this big choice that's like first up, which is, does it make sense for me to deploy onto an existing platform, or does it make sense for me to create my own, right? To create my own like blockchain. And for some use cases, deploying the DApp onto an existing blockchain makes sense. In fact, that's our entire ecosystem consists of people who made that choice, right? That said, hey, it makes more sense for me to deploy onto a chain. Now, I would say though that like being able to create your own blockchain, you do have, it's a bigger canvas, right? So you have like, a much larger canvas to draw on, and you can control things that, you can't control when you're deploying onto another platform, particularly around the economics, things like gas and other things. These are things that you can customize and tailor. And I think for me, the thing that is important about being able to build your own blockchain is this like idea of specialization. So, in our case, we obviously have adopted this Ethereum style EVM model, and that has a lot of benefits, right? That makes us compatible with a whole lot of tools. There's a lot of people that already know how to develop in Solidity. There's security auditors already know how to look at Solidity-based code. So there's a lot of benefits, but it is a particular model. And if, for example, let's say that you wanted to create like an application that stores data, I can tell you right now, the EVM is not like the right solution like for that. It's extremely expensive to store data. It's not designed well for that. So that's where, if you want to create a chain that stores data, let's say that offers storage as a service, decentralized storage as a service, you're going to want to create a chain. And optimize it like for that use case. So I do think it's just an important capability to be able to specialize your chain to different use cases. And this is the trick is I think historically, because the chains have been all isolated, so they're all usually kind of not connected to other things, then you get this situation where every chain has to kind of be at least okay at most things. But what you realize is that they often are like masters of none, right? So you kind of are okay at everything, but kind of not great at any one thing. Once you connect these chains and have this ability to specialize, that's the key unlock, right? So then you can really focus on, let me make the best possible storage chain I can, just to use that example. And then maybe I'm bad at smart contracts, but okay, then I can do an integration with Moonbeam, right? And I'll use them for smart contracts. I'll use myself for storage. I'll use another chain for storing like user's identity, let's say. And so I think that's the unlock, is that you can kind of specialize your chain and then kind of make almost trade agreements like with other chains to do the things that you're not good at. That I think is going to be a big unlock.
Derek, this was a really awesome explanation. I think in most people's heads, this would like literally click why this architecture was implemented. And could you please maybe also tell what the role of XCM tokens on Polkadot is in order to basically combine the picture into a whole?
Yeah, so I mean, the great strength that Polkadot has is it has this built-in networking capability that connects these chains together that are deployed to it, so-called parachains. And so that connectivity or that technology is called XCM. And so we've used that XCM technology to implement a set of use cases. The first one is a token use case. And I think for any interop technology, moving tokens is one of the first use cases, very practical. It's, there's always demand for this when you have users with different tokens on different chains. And so we implemented something called XC20. So XC20, it's like an ERC20. So in the sense that if there's a token on Polkadot, a Polkadot native token that moves to Moonbeam, it looks like an ERC20. So different protocols, different dApps can work with that asset as if it's an ERC20. So that's quite useful. Then all these DEXs, other kinds of dApps that are on Moonbeam already don't have to change anything. They just work with these assets like they're ERC20s. But because they're a Polkadot native token, they can move freely to other parachains. And so this is, it's a pretty simple feature to say, hey, let's just make, have this Polkadot native asset. It can move around, but it's an ERC20 when it's on Moonbeam. That already alone has opened up a lot of possibilities. So that means that, dApps are coming in and want to access the users and assets on Polkadot. They can deploy to Moonbeam, and then there's a path for those assets to come from other parachains to come to Moonbeam and get used in those protocols. And then even on the reverse way, what we're seeing now is that people want to create new ones of these. So they might say, you know what, maybe I'm a project, maybe I'm going to have a parachain in the future, but not yet. I want a token. Well, let me create it as one of these XC20s. Then it can be used inside of all of these protocols on Moonbeam. But then ultimately, I'll be able to move it to my parachain, in the future. And so, we're seeing a lot of this use case of even outside assets coming in and then wanting to be kind of distributed out to other parachains. So yeah, it's the first use case of many, but it's already, we're getting quite a bit of traction on that so far.
So it's like also a native cross-chain asset, basically, you can use for communicating.
That's right. That's right. And I can give you a second example. I mean, this asset scenario is kind of the first example, but what we're very interested in are these cross-chain use cases that are more functional, right? So that you have, like function calls, let's say. You might have an app that's spanning multiple chains. So a good example of that is, right now there is a Lido implementation on Moonriver. There's soon to be on Moonbeam as soon as the XCM features are enabled there. And the way that works is, Lido creates a liquid staking protocol, right? So they have that for Ethereum, and they have that for a number of other chains. And so for their work on Polkadot, we basically partnered with the team there. And what they've done is they've created a dApp on Moonbeam. So you have a user experience that's similar to the Ethereum-based Lido interaction, where you can deposit in the case of Moonriver, KSM into the protocol, and you get out STKSM as a result, this liquid stake version. But behind the scenes, what's happening is the dApp is on Moonbeam, but we've created remote function calls, so that they can basically control staking operations on the Kusama relay chain. And so they're kind of, their dApp is controlling these things that are happening on another chain using XCM messages. And so that, I think this is a cool use case, because you can see here that you're kind of combining functionality across two specialized chains, right? So the relay chain specializes in staking and governance and some other functions. And Moonbeam specializes in smart contracts and this Ethereum style approach. And so they have a dApp that kind of spans both those chains, but provides one user experience back to the user. And so this is the kind of thing where we expect to see a lot more of this, where dApp developers will now be able to use functions from multiple chains and kind of pull them together into one app and one experience for the user.
That's definitely cool. So you can use XCM for fetch data, for example, from a blockchain, as you said before, which was built for storing data or big sets of data, get the data, do something on another blockchain, and all using XCM's tokens.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think, there's a lot of interop. I mean, I think there's a lot of people pursuing this now, this idea of, hey, there's many blockchains, how do we interoperate? But I do think that there's different categories of security, I guess, in those approaches. And I think by far this light client approach that is taken by Polkadot, also by the way, it's the same approach taken by Cosmos and their IBC technology. That is the best approach. That's the most secure. And then you kind of have to make some sacrifices as you kind of move away from this approach where it's engineered into the blockchains itself.
And also following this up, a good question I think would be how does Moonbeam depend on other parachains on Polkadot? So is it a good thing for Moonbeam itself if different parachains actually get more users? So are they basically like codependent on each other, the parachains?
Well, the structure of Polkadot is that it's one system, and we're all kind of part of the system. So there definitely there's an expression, an American expression, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So if you're all part of the same system, then other parachains being successful somehow like lift us as well, and then maybe we in turn do the same thing for other projects. So there definitely is some aspect of togetherness, and that there's a shared notion of success. And I think that's actually pretty cool, because that means that we have built-in collaborators with all of these other parachain teams that are almost incentivized to work together on these scenarios that might span multiple chains but create like something where it's like bigger than the sum of its parts. So that's I think that's like a very cool part of a multi-chain system like Polkadot. On the other hand, I would say that it's not, every chain can kind of still make their own path forward. I mean, we see our path forward as actually being a little bit of this like on-ramp to Polkadot, right? So I think in some ways we make Polkadot a little bit like easier to digest and access, because, for example, just take the wallets, right? So like the wallets you use when you interact with Moonbeam is MetaMask, like for the most part. So that's already familiar to a lot of people. They already have it. They already, they're already used to like switching between chains. So you kind of ease them in. They can go from like Ethereum mainnet to Moonbeam, and it feels pretty familiar. But then once you're on Moonbeam, maybe you say, okay, well, look at now there's these different XEM connections I can make to other chains on Polkadot. And yeah, maybe there's some different, that's where we start using different wallets if you're going to move to other chains. But we see ourselves as this kind of on-ramp where, we're kind of making the whole ecosystem a bit more accessible, to a broader audience at large.
That's definitely true. Like, for example, Moonbeam, the only thing I've done there right now is staking my Glimmer tokens. That's like 2 seconds. You've got them staked through MetaMask, what I'm using. Or, for example, we just made a video about how to stake your Kusama with using Lido, then send them the STKSM and XTKSM for farming. I really see like no difference in the end users as to Ethereum, for example, I don't know, Polygon and all the other blockchains. And this is definitely some... that's good that it's not something difficult.
Yeah, no, I think the user experience is often something that's overlooked, right? But it's quite important to help drive adoption for your project.
And also talking like right now about Moonbeam and Moonriver, could you please tell, are there any differences between Moonriver and Moonbeam? Being Moonriver, it's experimental, basically network, or Kusama being experimental network of Polygon, maybe in security, or could you maybe name some other examples?
Yeah, so it is, we do follow the original idea of parity, where Kusama for us is a canary net. And what does that mean? So it means that the code is actually the same on Moonbeam and Moonriver. It's the same code base. But if we have something new, if we have a new release, like these XCM features, for example, they'll always ship to Moonriver first, and there we kind of allow them to soak there, if you want to call it that. We say, okay, let's let these features run there for some number of weeks, and then once they've proven themselves there, then we'll do the upgrade and the deployment to Moonbeam. So it does serve a function in the sense of, from a development standpoint, it helps us almost improve the security and de-risk like the Moonbeam deployment ultimately. Now, that was the original idea, and we follow that. And by the way, that has been extremely helpful. There's a lot of other networks out there that don't have this idea of a canary net. And so if you look at, for example, our Moonbeam mainnet launch, or almost anything that we did on Moonbeam has been quite smooth. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that we did all those things first on Moonriver. And yeah, I mean, there were a couple bumps in the road on Moonriver, so I won't lie. I mean, nothing like too bad, but we definitely hit some bumps, because it's the first time we were doing something, and we said, okay, well, now we've learned, and here's how we have to do it the next time around. We need to automate these things, and so that's made our deployment process on Moonbeam a lot like more solid and uneventful. So that's the original idea. Now, I will say that you come with an original idea, and then reality sometimes moves in like different directions. So I think largely as a result of, we decided to experiment also with the token distribution model on Moonriver to be something different than what was on Moonbeam. And I think that has led to some interesting differences where the communities and the token holders are different on the two networks. And you realize that that means something for these blockchain networks. So by having a different set of token holders, a different community around it, I mean, there is overlap, but there are some differences. That leads to then different trajectories in some way. So there might be different dApps that are deployed to one versus the other. We even have teams that are saying, no, like I'm focused on Moonriver, I want to just deploy there and not to Moonbeam. And then some vice versa, where they might say, no, I'm only focused on Moonbeam. So there definitely are differences. I would say, in particular, there's an NFT. This NFT gaming community seems to be, centered around Moonriver right now. At least a lot of the activity. So there's that difference in just the users and what the ecosystem looks like. But other than that, the code is the same. I would say that really the difference boils down then to, there is a bit of a difference in terms of cost and economic security. So the KSM token and the DOT token have this relationship too, where KSM is less valuable than DOT. That means that the costs on Kusama and correspondingly on Moonriver are less, but you probably do then in turn have a bit less economic security just by the value of the assets being less. And so that is one reason where we've seen some people say, hey, I just want the maximum economic security. So that means that, Polkadot and Moonbeam are the place that makes sense for me to deploy. If you want the more experimental, place where you can kind of try things out, that's probably where Moonriver fits in better.
And also following this up, maybe in the future, I don't know if we're talking like right now in 2, 3, maybe 5 or even 10 years, naturally, for the coming years, there will be less stuff coming as experimental things. So right now there's a lot of stuff happening. You've got the DApps launching. You've got Moonbeam just launched. What is the long-term use case for Moonriver if basically Moonbeam is intended to be the main chain?
But it goes back to this life of its own. I mean, we fully intend to support and maintain Moonriver like in parallel to Moonbeam as a first-class a first-class chain. There's, with this property that we're deploying things there first. I would say that is different. So we have seen some other parachain teams have begun to focus on, either their Kusama deployment or in many cases just on their Polkadot deployment. And you can kind of see that maybe they're, for those teams focusing on their Polkadot deployment, that the Kusama deployment, just has less attention and less activity. But that is not the case for us. I mean, we see both of these as equally important. And we're even dividing time between them internally, so we're not favoring kind of one over the other. And if you look right now, for example, with these XCM integrations, there's a lot of activity happening on Moonriver as a result.
So it's not like that over some time Moonriver will be just stashed away and you will only focus on Moonbeam. So two equal projects basically.
I mean, I've used the way to describe them as they're kind of like siblings. It's like brother and sister, and maybe maybe they're a bit different. Maybe they don't get along from time to time, but in the end, they're part of the same family. So that they know that one can't be successful without the other.
Awesome. And are there maybe right now or any planned business-sized use cases for Moonbeam or Moonriver? Maybe some companies from the traditional economic sector are looking towards you or want to partner with you, use your parachain for some business maybe.
Yeah, I would say that historically that has been less of a focus for us. We've been more focused on what I'd call like crypto native use cases, and that's probably the bulk of the deployed projects are more like that. For example, DeFi, pure DeFi protocols and so on. But we do see some of these use cases. For example, there's a project called Offtrail that is building an enterprise solution. They've selected Moonbeam as their platform. They do kind of enterprises use them to kind of provide a tamper-proof log of what data sets were in a certain state at a given time, and they're solving certain compliance problems with that. And Moonbeam was a good fit for their use case. So we do see things like this. And the other area I would say that I'm seeing activity is in kind of crossover like fintech, like traditional fintech to DeFi. There does seem to be some crossover happening there where you might have a traditional fintech app or company that is then plugging into DeFi protocols kind of like on the back end, but then they're providing that service kind of front ending it in different ways to the user. So it's definitely that's a kind of more of a crossover scenario, but we start to see these kinds of scenarios happen. For us though, the main driver is just where are there developers that are developing interesting things, and we want to work with them. And I would honestly say right now that it's more the case that it's on the DeFi native scenarios is where we see more of the innovation and just activity and good quality development teams. So that's that's kind of what we're focused on. So we kind of just follow the developers, where they are.
I also wanted to really go into detail about the developers, grant programs which you can offer. But one quick question before we move to the developers: how do you expect to see, or maybe how do you expect to see the whole blockchain space in maybe 5 years from now? You said Polkadot has, of course, great potential. Which blockchain types maybe should survive, and basically what blockchain types should natively get less popularity, and why? I'm not talking about just Polkadot and parachains.
Yeah, no, I understand. Here's my point of view: is I think that there will continue to be more and more blockchains, but there will be a consolidating set of technology stacks that developers are using to develop apps on those blockchains. And so I already start to see where some of the concentration points are. So for example, the Ethereum tech stack and the EVM, like we've implemented on Moonbeam, that's here to stay. I mean, I don't see that going anywhere anytime soon. It's got a huge, inertia around all the developers and tools and other things. And so that tech stack will stay, but I expect there to be many blockchains. You start to see this with all these sharding things we were talking about before, where even prominent blockchains might have 40, 50 sub chains underneath them, right? And EVM chains are definitely going to be one of those where you might be in an individual game and say, hey, I need my own EVM, for capacity reasons to run this game and service the kind of users I want to serve. So EVM is one. I would say that Cosmos and the Cosmos SDK is definitely another one. I mean, there's a lot of traction happening in that ecosystem. And I think the Cosmos SDK is undisputably one of the things that you would use if you go down that separate path of, I need to build my own blockchain. And then of course, where we are in the Polkadot ecosystem with Substrate, I think that's a third technology stack that, these things take a long time to build. This is like a 5-year development effort to build one of these things. It's very complicated engineering. So it's very hard for other people to replicate. So those three are quite clear to me. It's kind of EVM technology stack, Cosmos, and Substrate. But I think there's going to be many chains, that implement one of those three tech stacks. A little bit beyond that, it's a little harder to say. I mean, I think there's ecosystems like Solana. I mean, that they've gotten a lot of traction. So I think you can probably throw Solana in there as another tech stack. But there's a long tail of other chains that have their own tech stacks. I expect many of those to struggle to find enough adoption to be relevant, right? I think this is the trap that I think people creating blockchains fall into, is to say, oh, well, I can make this better tech stack. It's going to be more efficient, faster, what have you. And they underestimate, the tooling and kind of what it takes to build an entire ecosystem of users and practitioners, developers, auditors, all these things around it is actually pretty difficult. So that's kind of my point of view. So more chains, less tech stacks, and at least those three, I feel quite confident will be prominent.
And talking about the tech, how easy is it for the developers that have built their DApp on Ethereum, for example, to move it to Moonbeam? So basically, how much time will they spend if it's an app like Uniswap, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for any kind of straightforward DApp like a Uniswap v2, that's basically a half a day worth of work or less. We have pretty much full compatibility with all of the Ethereum API. The one place I'd say that there's some minor differences is because both Moonbeam and Polkadot employ a proof of stake mechanism. There are certain RPC calls from Ethereum mainnet that have to do with its proof of work consensus mechanism that just return default values. So if you ask for what's the difficulty, what's uncles, these kind of proof of work concepts, those are just get dummy answers. But that's pretty specialty. I've seen a couple mining pool contracts, other things that won't work, but basically anything else that's kind of standard is just literally a copy and paste, right? Or there's a different network ID, but you can point your deployment scripts if you have a hard hat or other kind of deployment script. You just alter the target, and then the automation will just run and deploy.
So basically, we can expect that if the developers have the motivation, we can see every DApp that's right now on Ethereum, maybe even on Polygon and other sidechains, layer twos, that they in the future can move to Moonbeam.
Yeah, and I think that in some sense that's what's been happening over the last 3 months is that there's been a lot of this happen. A lot of these cross deployments of existing code bases happening, and I think that was part of our strategy, right? We knew that would lead to quick adoption, but I would say that while that's interesting and that's already created a local economy, and I think that's going to grow on Moonbeam, I do think that these unique aspects we talked about at the beginning of the session here around enabling these cross-chain use cases, those are new. Like those don't exist on Ethereum, right? And so I think it's really developers that start to take advantage of those like unique features are the ones that are going to create like more lasting value and kind of interesting scenarios.
Maybe for the developers, why should they definitely start building right now on Moonbeam, on Moonriver? Basically, what are the good arguments to look in your direction?
I mean, I do think it's about this. It has to do with this, multi-chain kind of interoperability story we've been talking about. And so I would put it this way, right? If you're a developer now and you're building some protocol, what does the world look like? Well, for a lot of people historically, you had to choose. You had to say, okay, well, I need to make this like this, I need to really think hard and make this choice and say, oh, where am I going to deploy? Am I going to deploy on Ethereum? Oh, that means that I'm not going to get to all these other users. Or do I need to deploy on Moonbeam? Oh, how big is it? Is that going to be limiting to me? But I think that the thinking is changing now. And already, I mean, the first approach to kind of solving this problem is to say, okay, well, I'm going to be multi-chain. This is like there's a deployment of SushiSwap like on both Moonriver and Moonbeam, and so they were very early in this idea to say, what, we believe the world is moving multi-chain, and so what we're going to do is we're going to have deployments of Sushi like on all of these EVM compatible chains, and so I think they have 14, 15, 16 like deployments now. The challenge with that approach is that you get to all the chains, but it's kind of like you have these islands, right? So you have like 15 like different deployments, in the case of Sushi. So you have then like liquidity that's in like 15 different, chains, there's different pools. And, you have this front end integration, let's say. So you go to the front end and you can pick via drop down, okay, which chain do I want to connect to? But it's still the back end of these like separate, like isolated systems. And so I think, the trend that we see now is people saying, well, that's kind of okay, but like, how do we make a single system that is kind of maybe deployed in multiple places, but is aware that it's like all part of the same system? So I'll give you an example. Like there's a lending and borrowing team we're working with that's still under development, but their idea is to say, let's have this like natively multi-chain architecture and say, there'll be a brain on Moonbeam and there'll be a satellite like deployment on all these other chains like Avalanche, Polygon, and so on. And then if a user deposits like assets into one of the branch locations, the asset actually doesn't move, but rather there's a message that's sent from the branch back to the brain saying, hey, like this user deposited like these assets. And so in the center, you have like this accounting system that's keeping track of like the deposits that have happened. And so you can see that in this way, you kind of have like a single system that can coordinate like actions of like where the assets are, right? And maybe even make movements. Like a bank might make a movement of cash from one branch to another to satisfy its users. And so that's like a different approach where it's not these like 15 isolated systems. It's like one system that's still able to be multi-chain and address like users. That's the kind of example of I think the people that are kind of realizing that, that's where like Moonbeam would be a good fit, for building an app like that.
And the pros of such a system, as you named it, is that it's just going to be just more liquid and it's easier to move capital. Am I right here?
In the DeFi use case, yes, but I think there's other, there's NFT gaming, there's other kinds of use cases. And so I think, as this kind of reality is, sets in of this world of having multiple blockchains, and with like users and assets spread around, I think, it requires kind of new architectures to fit into this environment in a way that makes sense. And I'm actually personally of the belief that this is a quite big change to the way apps are developed. And that, as a new kind of generation of apps comes along that is natively multi-chain like this, it's going to lead to like new winners. There's going to be new winners like that adapt to that. And I think people that are still staying with the old model, they probably are going to be increasingly challenged. I think, on Ethereum mainnet, you can still have a lot of staying power there. But I mean, even like stalwarts from these kind of folks that were original OGs on Ethereum, they're going multi-chain too. I mean, we have a proposal underway for Uniswap right now, and even Uniswap was saying, hey, like we need to like be multi-chain, and we're trying to figure out. I mean, in their use case, they're saying, we're going to be multi-chain, but we at least need like our governance system to be unified. So they want, they have a governance system on mainnet, and then they have these branch deployments. And so we're working with our partner Nomad on this to say they want the governance decisions like that happen on mainnet to even be able to move out to the satellite chain. So you might say, I want to change a parameter on the Moonbeam deployment of Uniswap v3 from X to Y. You'd have a vote on mainnet, and then like the decision would get like routed down to the Moonbeam instance to get enacted there. Right. So they're again trying to solve this thing. They don't want like 5 different governance domains. They want like a single governance domain that manages like the whole system. And so, yeah, I mean, if Uniswap was, it's probably, they were kind of, slow on this multi-chain thing, but if they're, thinking about these things, then I think this is, it's foregone here. It's not an argument anymore of whether it's going to happen or not. It's just happening already.
And in order for the developers to move multi-chain also to Moonbeam, Moonriver, have you got any grants programs, maybe some different kinds of support, so which the developers can basically count on for moving?
Yeah, so I think the Moonbeam Foundation does have a grants program.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that we are known for in our reputation is that we provide like very good support for teams that are deploying. So that support can take the form of a grant, but really, for a lot of chains, I think it ends there. Like you get the grant and that's about it. But we've actually, make a pretty big priority around providing technical support to the teams. We have an entire developer relations team that helps support teams that are deploying. And in addition, we run a lot of like marketing programs to help build awareness for project teams in our ecosystem. And, again, back to that idea we talked about before that, the community around Moonbeam can then become the community around like some of these projects that are launching. And so, this is something I think we're known for is, kind of having this high quality experience for developers that want to deploy.
That's awesome. And maybe what are the biggest future plans for Moonbeam? Maybe you have any news that the community should be excited about in the next few weeks, maybe months. So what's special? Is there anything special happening?
Yeah, I would say, a couple of things I'd highlight is that in the coming, next like couple months, I'd say, is like, I really do expect there to be substantially more activity in the DeFi, sector, like on Moonbeam. As I mentioned, there's some of the last pieces of infrastructure that, we were waiting on are coming into place. And then that like clears the way for the DeFi ecosystem to really like start to take off. This has been intentionally, there hasn't, it's been kind of in this like bootstrapping phase, until now, and that's about to end with the deployment of Chainlink and all of these other DeFi teams that have been gated, can't deploy until Chainlink is there. So that's, I think, the most interesting thing that's happening in the short term. But while that's happening, we are working quite closely with a number of teams pursuing these multi-chain, these, like the scenarios I was describing, these like native multi-chain scenarios. And so that's what we're leaning like a lot into that, right? We want to help power as many of these like multi-chain scenarios. Because honestly, that's our differentiator, right? There's a lot of EVM chains out there. You can go to like, Avalanche C chain, or there's other EVMs. Mm-hmm. So we really see this like these cross-chain scenarios is that's the thing that we're going to be the best at. Like that's the thing we've really optimized for that. And we have XCM and these scenarios, and we have integration work we're doing into these overlay networks like Axelar and others. So that's really where those scenarios and kind of getting real use cases, and so we can start to really demonstrate what what gets unlocked with these new multi-chain approaches. That's like where I'd say that a lot of this year is going to be focused on just making sure we make those projects successful.
Great. So it's use cases in the DeFi space, and it's other projects moving to Moonriver from the existing space, basically, and Moonbeam.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Great. Maybe some kind of a question of your personal view. How do you expect, or would you like to see the Polkadot ecosystem in a couple of years? What should it be made of? Basically, what will the people be able to do on Polkadot in 2 years from now, for example?
Yeah. I think that Polkadot is kind of just coming out the gates now. We were the first parachain to launch in January. I expect to see more parachain teams building. I'm personally most interested in parachains as infrastructure. I mean, that's kind of what we are, right? So we're a parachain that kind of provides infrastructure that then other people build on top of. I personally think that's a very powerful idea. And so I know a number of teams that are building, very interesting infrastructural services as parachains, but still some also deploying app chains too. So it's not only that, but I think it just takes time for these technologies to mature. So we're still even in the midst of deploying further capacity upgrades and other things, and even around the use of substrate. So substrate has been under heavy development up until pretty recently, and it continues to be developed a lot, but there's just time needed to mature some of the tooling and other things around substrate, which will make it easier to develop parachains. So that's what I expect in further improvements in all these areas moving forward, which will result in more interesting parachains. And the way Polkadot works, the more parachains that are offering interesting services to the network, that makes the network more valuable, makes it grow. We can then offer those services to developers on Moonbeam, saying, hey, here's all of these interesting services that you can use as part of a cross-chain integration.
So we're more still in the beginning and the start of the story, and we just need to be patient, believing in the system, and there's a lot of things to come.
Yeah, I would say that's true, but I would go back to the point I made earlier that I am a believer that the strength of Polkadot comes from it being designed in the first place to accommodate these scenarios, whereas I see a lot of other chains trying to almost kind of fit on after the fact some of these ideas, and I think it's going to be challenging. And so this is the strength I think Polkadot has, where even if it's been taken time and been a bit slow to get to market, it has a more solid foundation. So that's our bet, and we'll see how things play out.
Thank you a lot, Derek. So these were some really unique thoughts actually, and a lot of interesting information. And I wanted to ask you, maybe you would like to share something from your side, so on any topic, or just something you would like to announce to the audience watching us.
Well, what should I say there? I mean, I am trying to get to more events and places to meet people in the community. So I was in Paris for Paris Blockchain Week earlier, and I am going to a number of conferences over the summer, and I do want to get actually over to your part of the world, when that's a possibility, because as I've said, we have this we've always had from the beginning this very strong community in the CIS region, and I think that this is something I want to do. So I guess I'm going to look for an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so we will definitely welcome you here, and if something comes that you will need the help from here, so we're always open for this. Yeah, but thank you again a lot for taking your time. Definitely was really helpful. I think the people watching our interview today, the video, definitely enjoyed it a lot, and thanks so much for your time. It was a big pleasure talking to you, Derek.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.